Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Slice of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Joining me today is Keith Figlioli, the managing partner at LRV Health. Keith, how are you today?
Good, Jared. How you doing?
Great to have you here. Let's dive right in. Would love to kind of first kick things off with everyone's favorite topic these days, AI. But would kind of love to hear maybe moments that you've seen that led, whether it's through your career or just over the last several years, that led up to this current wave of AI innovation in healthcare.
Yeah, I think I've been in healthcare informatics for 20 plus years, and I think what's old is new again, and what new is old again. So, what I mean by that is like we continue to see just multiple waves of new technologies and new capabilities that get better and better over the years that ultimately get applied at the same problems we've been talking about for 20 years. And I think there's a lot of advancement. I also think there's a lot of, there's still a lot of slack in the channel in terms of what can really be done versus, what is still a bit out there. When I think back to early days of when I got involved, it was really like pre-meaningful use in the electronic health record space. And it was, nobody really had a pulse about, how do we start digitizing and, really technology enabling the healthcare arena. And then obviously with meaningful use, that jump started sort of the baseline, what I would call like laying down the railroad tracks. And that really was about, and we're still in some of that to a certain degree, just how do we digitize our interactions in healthcare? The example I always give on the flip side of a different industry is travel. It's kind of like back in the day when they put Sabre in to book, an airline ticket, which still is in use today. And we have laid down those tracks for a long period of time, and we had a lot of theory of like how we can move up that stack and use some of that data to do various different things. And most of that work historically was like Herculean effort, just moving the data to a different system, doing something with that data, let alone cleaning that data. And then lo and behold, you fast forward 20 plus years and you get past meaningful use implementation, you get past 21st Century Cures Acts, you get into, fire adoption and API thinking in healthcare, and we're still not quite there. And now we've got the advent of generative AI to come through. And so, we wrote a piece not too long ago talking about, while there's a lot of really interesting hype in the cycle at the intersection of generative AI and AI in general in healthcare, we still have at least another decade of work to kind of really start seeing what I call true ROI out of this. And so all the work, all the capital that has gone into the market is really still laying the tracks and still really getting the baseline done in this industry to be able to do really interesting things over the next decade to 2 decades that has real tangible ROI. I mean, you can make a real argument that, and I have, the 38 billion plus that's gone in for meaningful use, plus all the venture capital north of 10 billion, 15 billion a year. I don't know how much ROI we've gotten out. We've definitely gotten some out, but you look differently if you looked at the e-commerce industry, in the retail industry, and what's changed there and the level of ROI that's come out of the friction and the retail environment, the physical footprint there. So
Well, why? I mean, obviously, healthcare is different than those spaces, but I guess what blockers still exist for like us not to see a faster ROI? Like, do you foresee that as time progresses, that ROI is going to be at a much faster pace? We're going to see faster ROI. Like, was it because we were so early? Like, there were these investments, and because these are dating back even a few years, right? Um, do you think over time, as the technology continues to progress and people become adopted or are prepared to adopt the technology at a faster rate, that ROI will increase? Like the time to take the time to get to ROI will become much faster.
I think it will, but I think you gotta put a lens down on the microcosm of the industry that is not just a private good. So when you look at other industries like the travel is the best example because it's an easy one to think about. You have a system like Sabre that transacts, then you have a layer of technologies that are airline websites, then you have things that aggregate the website, the airline websites, Expedia, Kayak. aggregates the aggregators, and everybody has a different level of value and a different level of ROI and faster transaction and faster processing of transparency. In healthcare, you have none of that. You have technology being applied to that, but it's a public and a private good, and it's a highly regulated industry, more regulated than even the airline industry. And there's huge billions of dollars to be lost with full transparency and full seamlessness of moving data around. And then just to apply another thought on that, if you really think about generative AI, it may get worse, not better, because what is at play with generative AI is better and better data, which may actually start bringing up bigger walled gardens in some of these environments, not bringing it down. And so it's just an interesting problem set. It's probably why I got into it so many years ago. Is it's just a Gordian knot, and it's not something that's like, oh yeah, well we just put a bunch of APIs out there and we'll just start moving some data, and you know healthcare system A and provider B will transact that information and allow you seamlessly to do that. I don't know. I mean, a stupid example is I don't know if you've moved healthcare providers lately, but just trying to move your data, even when in the era of 21st Century Cures Act and information blocking penalties, is still nearly an impossible task. And so it's really fascinating. I literally did it last summer and I had to pay $20.10 to move my record here in Boston from one health system to another. And lo and behold, that system never actually, and that data never got there. But I paid the $20.
And it was your record.
Yeah. So, and lo and behold, my new doctor, what they ended up doing, because we have a really robust HIE here in Massachusetts, actually just pulled all my information down that was relevant from the HIE. And it was quite fascinating in terms of going through that as a practitioner, an investor in the space, kind of living that, and everybody has these experiences in healthcare.
Yeah, it's but when you have that personal experience, like I just had someone that I know that went through, having cancer, and they were a physician and went through the process, and they said that experience of kind of going from, initially finding out they had cancer to going through chemo and the treatments and then the surgery, that opened their eyes up than even all of their like medical training and all their experience over the years to maybe just how flawed the system can be and where gaps still exist. So I think whenever you have those personal experiences, it opens your eyes even more. And especially like you've invested in all these companies, you've seen the bulk of the problems available, but when it's for you, it really changes things.
Yeah. I mean, I literally was part of the team that started thinking about APIs in healthcare as part of the ONCHIT standards committee, and like being like, oh, this is just really easy. And then literally invested in companies that built the pipes, then literally invested in companies that helped clean the data. And then you go through all this and you're like, oh my gosh, like what was that work for? And then back to ROI, where is the ROI coming out of this when, incentives are everything. And I think, the incentives in the market can never be overlooked. And that's why I think when people are like, well, we got this new great technology set, it'll be a year or two, we'll start seeing real ROI. And then the shine kind of comes off. We're seeing this already in Gen AI and healthcare. The noise factor is way down compared to where it was even, 6-12 months ago. We have certain parties in our incumbent network that are taking a lot of resources off it as well. And to me, that just is what we always thought about, is just the long tail of it. Does not, I'll be very clear about this, we fully believe in the capability. We think it has a long way to go, and the transformational nature of it. Just as it gets adopted in healthcare, it'll be very different in terms of the length of ROI, let alone the length of implementation of what will happen.
What are you hearing in terms of the blockers that still exist? Like, I mean, there's probably some stuff you maybe want to keep close to the vest and maybe they don't want you to say, but for the stuff that they'd be fine with you saying, what are you kind of hearing out there in terms of, for the people that are pressing maybe pause or they're not investing as heavily into it? Why? Like, I know you brought up some concerns earlier, but what else are they kind of saying?
Well, I think in the areas that it hit the sweet spot, like clinical documentation and some of the administrative and back office stuff, that stuff's kind of full tilt down and it'll play itself out. The problem with that, it's a race to the bottom because you have so many people playing with that technology that the price points on that is all going to go down. But then when you start thinking about the way people have been thinking about it, they've been thinking about it inside the organization, outside the organizations. What I mean by that is, are there things in big shops? Can they do development faster? Can they do IT functioning faster, call center faster? all of that stuff is incremental progress with some of the new capabilities, and a lot of the company's capabilities, where in the old days the AI was very fixed, it was very if-then typey statements, where now it's becoming more generative. The generative response and the noise factor in that is still being played out in terms of, can you control, what can you control, and what can't you control? So most of the projects that we see are very contained pilots. And they're very contained pilots in very safe environments. So in big organizations like large healthcare systems or large healthcare payers, think of things like, it's not that exciting, but think of things like employee training. Think of things like, how do you deal with website content? How do you modulate that? How do you think about feeding that? So there's a lot of projects that are happening, but outside of like a true clinical documentation area that's in and around the care workflow, a lot of the stuff is pretty safe pilots overall. And I think we're going to be like that for a bit until, some of the other stuff gets worked out.
What would you say some of the key differences between that first wave of healthcare innovation driven specifically by the EHRs and this current wave driven by AI? What are some of those key differences that you're seeing?
I think the first wave you saw, I mean, it actually went in multiple pieces, but the first wave was like a bunch of point solutions, right? And even on the EHR side, there were so many point solutions. There was an ED system, then there was, a clinical documentation system, then there was rev cycle systems, and then you had players like Eclipsys, now also, was part of Allscripts. Then you had obviously Epic come to the table, Cerner come to the table, and start pulling all that together. So we moved away from point solutions in wave one into these consolidated larger workflow systems, into like literally Epic, Meditech, Cerner, and now Allscripts is out of that business, but historically was in that business. And then you saw this wave of new venture capital come in and try to layer things on top of that, whether it was population health tools because of what was happening there with the ACA, whether it was data analytic tools because people had more data to play with, whether it was more integrated revenue cycle systems or bolt-on revenue cycle plays. And that became, again, another set of point solutions. And then you heard this wave over the last number of years of like, hey, we got to consolidate all these point solutions. And so we're in this kind of like point solution consolidation of like what truly matters on the things that sit in and around kind of core source systems, whether it's ERP or EHRs. And then now you have the next wave of things on the generative AI front that are kind of popping back up that are all point solutions as well and point problems. Because functionally the technology is pretty commoditized in terms of where you can get it from and what you can do. And so we just get into these constant waves in healthcare IT, in my opinion, of like point solutions down to consolidation, down to point solutions, down to consolidation in each one of the various areas.
Looking ahead, kind of taking a step away from AI for a moment, what are some of the key trends that you're seeing in healthcare IT that will shape the future of the industry beyond AI?
I think we're moving away from it's a technology problem. And I think it's like, how do you apply technology with a quotient of people still, which is ironic as that sounds. And the best example I can give is, this has been going on for years, but, every major consulting firm in healthcare will walk into let's just stay with health systems, will walk into a health system and say, hey, I'm going to go do some performance improvement work for you. I'm going to bring in 30 to 50 consultants. We're going to do some work around the things you control, labor or supplies. And it's mostly people and spreadsheets. I think the future, and we're starting to see this, and there's a couple of plays out in the marketplace without naming them, that are still doing that type of work, but now they're applying technology plus people to that. And they're greatly reducing the number of people they need for that task. And I think that's the most exciting thing about, in my opinion, about the AI movement, which is, can we start applying certain pieces of technology where instead of needing 30 to 50 people, we need like 3 to 5 people? Doesn't mean the people go away, by the way. You're still going to need certain aspects of people. And I think healthcare will always be a pretty hands-on service kind of centric business. But the number of people you need or the way you do things, like there's a great business out there in the patient access space. So the way that most health systems do call centers, the way they do intake of patients, it's kind of all over the place. But if you could apply some technology plus some people plus some blueprints and kind of pull that all together, I think that's where the sweet spot's going to be for the next decade. And it won't just be like, hey, deploy this tech and, trust me, it's going to work and you're going to pop out a bunch of ROI on the back end.
Interesting. Let's give some advice. We'd love to hear some advice from you now too, in terms of let's give some advice to the young professionals out there that are just entering the health IT space. They want to start their company. If you could just give them one or two pieces of advice in getting started, what would that be?
Yeah, get ready for the journey. It's like, you know, I think a lot of people get into this space that haven't been in this space, or to your point, or earlier in their career, and they think it's going to be, you know, fairly point A to point B. And I think people realize this in all early stage companies. It's always a journey. It's a roller coaster. But I think in healthcare, you have to be committed for the long term. And I don't think I just don't think it's a get rich quick industry. That's just not what this is. And you have to, I say this to everybody I always talk to, is like, you have to have some aspect of altruistic kind of like reason why you're in healthcare. It's the number one interview question I ask, and I'll say this to anybody if they're listening, is like, if you come and interview with us or you come and interview in a company, I'm like, why do you want to be in healthcare? Like, and if you can't really answer that question, I find it really hard for people to have durability in the industry. And to your point about personal experiences, a lot of times some of the best answers are that, like, they had somebody that went through something and they're like, this is absolutely insane. Like, this can't persist. And they just have this chip on their shoulder to go run through a wall, which is what it takes, many walls, not one wall, to change this system. And I think that's something that, I stuck with 20 plus years ago. I was like, look, I was in the consulting space for a long time, and saw a lot of industries, and just said, look, if I'm going to wake up every day, I want to make sure that I'm doing something for the greater good of society and really change a particular aspect, which is one of the most personal and important aspects of people's lives, which is healthcare. And I think that's the most important advice I give any young, whether it's a young CEO, young founding team, is like, this is just going to be a journey for you, and you have to have some purpose behind it personally every day to wake up, because you're going to literally wake up some days and be like, I cannot believe it's this hard.
Keith, for the companies you invest in, is it almost like a necessity that they have some sort of personal, like similar to when you're hiring someone? Do you kind of want that type of answer where there needs to be a personal experience, or they know someone that had an experience and they started to dig a little bit deeper into, wow, that's really painful? Or are you open to also some of these super smart people that decide to build these companies maybe without that personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's a gray answer. It's not a black and white answer for us, but like, we do have a three-part mission for the firm, and our firm is a little bit different in that, we're all former multi-decade operators in the healthcare space. And so we have lived this stuff on the ground and understand how hard it is. And second, all of our money, all of our partners are incumbent players, healthcare systems or players. We don't take any financial money from endowments, universities, family offices, none of that. And that forces us to have a different kind of mission orientation. The lion's share of our partners are nonprofit. We have a third component of our mission, which is around impact. How do you think about, if you're going to truly transform the game, how do you think about impact? Like, a perfect example is like, as great as it is and as great of an investment it is, we would never have invested in HIMSS. Like, that would not, for us to continue to perpetuate certain aspects of the fee for service system on, up and to the right, we wouldn't have done that deal. But something that's really trying to change the way for the better good of the system, that ultimately gets back to the founder question you're asking, is like right down the middle for us. Like, when we get into like a women's health deal that is fundamentally changing C-section rates, maternal mortality, that is critically important for us, because that's exactly how our partners think. And we need to be thinking about the greater community that we're trying to serve with some of the capital that we're deploying in some of these plays.
What's next as we look into the second half of this year for you that is really exciting you? Whether it's an event, a meeting with a company, you don't have to say who, but like what's really exciting you for the second half of 2024?
Yeah, I think we're Rock Health just came out with their data this past week, and I think people are starting to see the what we'd call active and steady coming back, and the new normal. So I'm excited to have a lot of this stuff normalized, which includes some bad stuff too, because I think we're going to see some companies go away. We're going to see some deals that have to get done in terms of consolidation. But I do believe, we're long investors. We always has been. We're long on the industry around transformation. So it doesn't really, we've been doing this since 2000. So we've seen the '01 cycle. We've seen the '08 cycle. We've now seen this cycle. And so it doesn't really change our mindset, but I think it's important for the industry to kind of normalize itself given the last, couple of years. And you're starting to see that in the data. So PitchBook's released some data this past week too that's starting to normalize across all venture, not just healthcare. But I do think healthcare in the second half of the year, everything that people have been talking about for the last 18 months to 24 months, they thought was going to happen, I think is going to happen. And we're starting to see happen at more pace. And I think that'll be healthy for everybody involved.
Absolutely. Well, Keith, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast here today, sharing some great thoughts with us, and talking a little bit about AI as well. People need that daily consumption at this point of something AI. So we appreciate you giving your take on it, and hopefully we can have you on maybe on a panel or some other conversations in the future.
Great.